It was raining hard that night, the kind of rain where you can barely see a few feet ahead, and the windshield wipers are moving so fast they become useless. I was driving alone, tired, and just wanted to get home. The highway was empty, just endless black stretches of wet asphalt and the occasional flicker of lightning in the sky. The storm made everything worse. I was gripping the wheel tightly, focusing on the road, but in the back of my mind, something didn't feel right. It was that weird tension you get when something's about to go wrong. Then I saw him. A man on the side of the road, soaked to the bone, his thumb sticking out. A hitchhiker out in this weather? My first instinct was to keep driving. I mean, who picks up strangers in the middle of the night, especially in a storm? But the rain made me feel sorry for him. I thought about how miserable he must be, and before I could talk myself out of it, I was slowing down. The guilt of leaving him out there made my stomach twist. He climbed in, dripping water all over the seat. I gave him a quick nod and tried to sound friendly, even though my hands were shaking a little. "Rough night to be out," I said, trying to make conversation. He didn't answer right away. He just sat there, staring out the window, his face pale and expressionless. I felt uncomfortable immediately, but I told myself I was being paranoid. After a minute, he mumbled something about being grateful. His voice was low, almost too quiet to hear over the rain pounding the roof. I nodded again, keeping my eyes on the road. It was awkward, and I could feel the silence pressing down on me. So, I asked him where he was headed. He didn't give a straight answer, just said something like, "Not far." That should have been the first red flag, but I was too focused on getting home to think much about it. He started talking again after a while, but his words made me uneasy. He mentioned things he shouldn't have known, like the exact model of my car, the route I usually take home from work, even the fact that I had just bought new tires last week. I laughed it off, pretending it was a coincidence. Maybe he'd seen my car before or something, but the more he spoke, the more I realized he knew things about me that were too personal. He started asking about my family, like he knew them. "How's your sister? She must be worried about you driving in this storm." I froze. My sister had called me earlier, asking me to stay at her place because of the weather, but I had told her I'd be fine. How did he know that? I felt a knot in my stomach, but I kept driving. The rain made it impossible to stop anywhere safely, and my mind was racing. Every word he said felt like a trap, like he was trying to get inside my head. I tried to change the subject, but he kept steering the conversation back to me. It was like he was enjoying my discomfort. I started looking for a place to drop him off, but there was nowhere. Just dark, wet road stretching for miles. The storm was getting worse, and my heart was pounding in my chest. Finally, the fuel light blinked on. I had to stop at a gas station, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to be stuck in one place with him for too long, but I had no choice. The nearest station was a tiny, run-down place with one flickering light above the pump. I pulled in, my hands trembling as I unbuckled my seatbelt. The hitchhiker didn't move. He just sat there, staring straight ahead. I told him I was going to fill up the tank, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked a little. As I got out of the car, I glanced back at him, and that's when he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind that made my skin crawl. I hurried to the pump, trying to keep my breathing steady. I was drenched in seconds, but the rain felt better than being inside that car with him. The station attendant was a gruff old man, barely looking at me as I paid. I wanted to say something, to tell him that something wasn't right, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't even know what I would say. "Help me, I picked up a creepy hitchhiker?" It sounded stupid in my head, so I kept quiet and went back to the car. When I got back in, the hitchhiker's demeanor had changed. He leaned closer to me, his voice low and cold. "I've been following you for a while," he said, and my blood went cold. He started talking about things that didn't make sense, things I didn't want to hear. He knew where I lived. He knew my daily routine. He knew everything. I couldn't think straight. My hands were shaking as I started the car and pulled out of the station. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't let him stay in the car. I had to get rid of him. My heart was racing, and the storm outside made it hard to see. I took a random turn, hoping I could find somewhere safe, a crowded area, a police station, anything. The hitchhiker noticed. His tone shifted and his body tensed. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice flat, but there was an edge to it. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just kept driving, trying to stay calm, but my hands were slick with sweat, slipping on the wheel. Then, suddenly, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled over, my breath coming in short gasps. Before I could say anything, he leaned in close, whispering something I still can't shake. "You can't run from me." And just like that, he opened the door and disappeared into the storm, leaving me sitting there, soaked in fear, wondering if I'd ever truly be free of him. I don't think I will be. I don't usually get scared when I'm driving at night. I actually prefer it. Less traffic, no distractions, just the quiet hum of the engine and the road ahead. But that night was different. I was on my way back from a work trip, taking a familiar route home. It was late, past midnight, and the road stretched out in front of me, empty. The only light came from my headlights cutting through the darkness. I was tired, but not the kind of tired that makes you drift off. No, I was awake, alert even. Maybe it was the quiet, or maybe it was the nagging feeling I couldn't quite place. The air felt heavy, and I kept glancing at the rearview mirror as if expecting to see something there. But of course, there was nothing. Just the dark road behind me. I told myself I was overthinking. I just needed to focus on the road and get home. But then, up ahead, I saw something. The beams of my headlights hit what looked like a roadblock. It wasn't an official one, just a couple of wooden barriers across the road and two cars parked at odd angles. I slowed down, unsure of what I was looking at. As I got closer, I could see people standing near the cars, waving for me to stop. At first, I thought maybe there'd been an accident. One of the guys walked toward my car, waving again. His face looked calm, almost friendly. He was saying something, though I couldn't hear through the closed windows. I rolled it down just a bit, enough to catch his words. He told me there was an accident ahead, nothing serious, just some debris, and they were here to help guide traffic. My gut told me something was off. I couldn't explain it, but the way the man spoke, too casual for the situation, the late hour, it all seemed wrong. His clothes didn't look right either. Old, worn out, and not what you'd expect from someone handling a road incident. But I didn't want to be rude or suspicious for no reason. After all, they could just be trying to help, right? So I pulled over, keeping the engine running. As I did, I started noticing more things that didn't sit well with me. The cars they had looked too beat up, like they'd been sitting there for a long time. And the other people hanging around the cars, they weren't doing anything, just watching me. My heart started racing, and I realized I had made a mistake. The man who had waved me down walked closer to the car. I kept my hand on the gear shift, ready to drive off if things went south. He leaned in toward the window, a little too close for comfort. His smile was gone now, replaced by a look that made my skin crawl. He asked where I was headed, why I was alone on this road so late. His tone was off, like he wasn't really interested in the answers, but just liked hearing me explain myself. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I nodded, muttering something vague, trying to act calm. But as I looked around, I saw the others moving closer. They weren't rushing, just slowly closing in, surrounding my car without making it obvious. I knew then that I wasn't getting out of this situation easily. My throat tightened, and my hand gripped the steering wheel. I was trapped. The man kept talking, but I wasn't listening anymore. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to get out. I glanced to my right and saw one of them near the passenger side door, his hand on the handle, ready to pull it open. I acted on instinct. I rolled up the windows and slammed the car into gear. The man closest to the window stepped back, startled, but then he lunged at the door, yanking at the handle as I floored the gas. The tires squealed as I shot forward, swerving around the makeshift barrier. I heard shouts behind me, angry voices, but I didn't look back. I kept driving, heart pounding, my hands shaking on the wheel. The road blurred as I sped away, the darkness swallowing everything behind me. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I just drove, the fear pressing down on my chest like a weight. After what felt like hours, I finally pulled over. My body was shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. I dialed 911, telling them about the roadblock, the people, everything. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but I couldn't focus. My head was spinning, and all I wanted was to get away from that place. She told me to stay where I was and wait for help. I sat there, my car idling on the side of the road, my breathing slowly returning to normal. For a moment, I thought I was safe. But then, in the rearview mirror, I saw something. Headlights. They were getting closer. I froze, my hands gripping the steering wheel again. The lights were blinding as the car pulled up behind me. I couldn't see who it was, but I knew. I just knew. It was them. The same group. My heart stopped. I didn't wait to find out what they wanted this time. I hit the gas and sped off, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from them. The headlights followed me, staying close behind. I drove faster, pushing my car to its limit, hoping, praying that I could outrun them. I don't know how long I drove or how I managed to lose them, but eventually, the headlights were gone. I didn't stop again until I reached a gas station on the edge of town, shaking and drenched in sweat. The police never found the roadblock or the people I described. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all. But then I remember the way their eyes looked in the dark, and I know, deep down, it was real. I was driving home from a friend's place, the kind of long, quiet drive that gives you time to think about everything and nothing at all. It was late, past midnight, and the road was almost empty. Just me, the soft hum of my car, and the darkness stretching out in front of me. It felt peaceful, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. You know that feeling, like you're being watched, even when there's no one around? That's what I was feeling. The road was lined with trees, no houses, no street lights, just darkness. I focused on the road, trying to calm myself down, telling myself it was just my imagination. Then, out of nowhere, I saw flashing lights in my rearview mirror, red and blue, blinking like a warning. My stomach dropped, but I didn't panic. Maybe I had been speeding, or maybe my taillight was out. Either way, I pulled over, like you're supposed to. I sat there, engine running, trying to remember if I'd done anything wrong. I checked my mirrors, waiting for the officer to approach. The lights were bright, so I couldn't make out much of the car behind me. Still, it seemed normal enough. The man stepped out of the car, wearing a police uniform. He moved slowly, almost casually, like he had all the time in the world. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that this was probably just routine. He came up to my window, knocking on the glass. I rolled it down and he asked for my license and registration. His voice was low, not the usual commanding tone you expect from a cop, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I handed him what he asked for, my hands a little shaky, but nothing unusual. He looked at my license for a long time, too long. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his eyes scanning me like he was searching for something. "Just heading home," I said, trying to sound casual. My voice felt too loud in the quiet of the night. "Anyone waiting for you?" he asked, almost too casually. That's when the first twinge of unease crept in. Why would he ask that? It didn't seem right. My mind raced for an explanation, but I couldn't think of any. Still, I didn't want to make it weird, so I just shook my head. No, just me. He nodded but didn't move. The way he was standing, leaning against my car, made me uncomfortable. It was like he wasn't in any hurry to finish this stop. Something wasn't adding up. I glanced at his uniform again. The badge didn't look like the ones I'd seen before, and his belt, it didn't have the usual gear, no radio, no taser, just a gun. I looked at the car behind me, trying to see if it had any police markings. It was hard to tell with the lights blinding me, but the shape didn't look right. It wasn't a cruiser, more like an older sedan. That's when it hit me. This guy wasn't a cop. My throat tightened, panic rising in my chest, but I didn't want him to notice. I needed to get out of this fast. I forced a smile and said, "Everything okay, officer? If there's nothing else, I'd like to head home now." He didn't smile back. Instead, he leaned closer, his face inches from mine. "Step out of the car," he said, his voice colder now. My heart raced. No way was I stepping out. I couldn't let him see I was scared, so I made up a lie, something about needing to get home to feed my dog. His eyes narrowed, and for a second, I thought he was going to reach for the door. I started to reach for the gear shift, praying he didn't notice. Then, without warning, his fist slammed against my window. I flinched, my mind screaming at me to just drive, but my body felt frozen. The glass didn't break, but it shook hard. He was losing patience, and I was running out of time. I had to make a move, now. I said, "Step out of the car." His voice was a shout now, angry and raw. His hand dropped to his belt, hovering near his gun. That's when I knew. This guy wasn't just pretending to be a cop. He was dangerous, and if I didn't do something, I wasn't going to make it out of here. In a split second, I slammed the car into drive and hit the gas. My tires screeched, and the car lurched forward. I heard him yell something behind me, but I didn't care. I wasn't stopping. I kept my foot on the pedal, the engine roaring as I sped down the road, not daring to look back. The headlights from his car followed me, bright and blinding in my mirrors. My hands were slick with sweat, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The road twisted and turned, and I prayed I wouldn't lose control, but the car behind me stayed close. Too close. I glanced at my phone, but it was out of reach, sitting useless in the passenger seat. No way I could call for help. My only choice was to outrun him. My heart pounded, and every second felt like it stretched out forever. I couldn't tell how far I'd gone, but the lights were still there, chasing me, getting closer. Suddenly, I saw a turn ahead, a narrow side road I hadn't noticed before. Without thinking, I yanked the wheel, my car swerving onto the smaller road. The tires skidded, and I nearly lost control, but I managed to hold on. The lights behind me disappeared as I sped down the dark, winding path. I drove for what felt like hours, the adrenaline still pumping through me, until I was sure he wasn't following anymore. Only then did I pull over, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. I sat there in the silence, breathing hard, trying to convince myself it was over, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. That man was still out there, and the worst part? He'd know where to find me. It was late, and I was tired. My shift had dragged on longer than expected, and now I was driving home down a lonely highway. The road stretched out in front of me, empty and quiet, with only the hum of my engine and the occasional gust of wind breaking the silence. I liked driving at night because there were fewer cars, and the peace usually helped me relax, but not tonight. In the rearview mirror, I noticed a pair of headlights coming up fast behind me. I didn't think much of it at first, maybe someone was in a hurry, but as the car approached, they flashed their high beams at me. I frowned. It was annoying, but didn't seem like a big deal. Maybe the driver was trying to signal something. I ignored it, kept my hands on the wheel, and focused on getting home. A few minutes passed, and the same car flashed its lights again. This time, it wasn't just once. They flashed rapidly, and the driver started honking. My pulse quickened. What was their problem? Why were they doing this? I checked my speed, making sure I wasn't driving too slow, but I was going the limit. As the lights kept flashing, my irritation started to turn into unease. I thought about pulling over to let them pass, but something made me hesitate. What if it was someone dangerous? I had heard stories of road rage incidents, people getting attacked for no reason. Was this one of those situations? I told myself not to overthink it and just keep driving. They would eventually get bored and go around me. But they didn't. Instead, the car got closer, almost tailgating me now. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. My breath quickened. This was not normal. The road was wide enough. They could easily pass me, but they stayed right behind, flashing their lights and honking over and over again. I started to panic. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced around, looking for a way out. There was no exit in sight, just the dark highway ahead. I didn't know what to do. Should I stop? Keep driving? Every story of roadside attacks I had ever heard played in my head, and none of them ended well. I didn't want to become one of those stories. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. My hands were shaking. My head was spinning with fear, and I decided to pull over. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe they just wanted to tell me something about my car. My brain tried to calm me down, but my gut screamed that something was very wrong. I slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder. The car behind me did the same. For a moment, everything was quiet again, just the sound of the engine and my own heavy breathing. Then the driver of the other car got out and started running towards me. My heart sank. He was yelling something, waving his arms wildly, but I couldn't understand him. I felt frozen in my seat, unsure if I should roll down the window or drive off. He reached my door, banging on the glass, still shouting. That's when I noticed he wasn't angry. He looked terrified. "Look in the back!" He finally screamed through the glass, pointing frantically at my car. I hesitated, unsure of what he meant. My mind raced. Slowly, I turned my head to look into the back seat, and that's when I saw it. There was a man, crouched down behind the passenger seat, barely visible in the darkness. He had been there the whole time. My blood ran cold. My heart stopped for a second, and I couldn't breathe. How had I not noticed him before? How long had he been there? I stumbled out of the car, nearly falling to the ground as I scrambled to get away. The other driver grabbed me, pulling me to the side of the road, his voice shaky, as he explained that he had seen the man slip into my car while I was stopped at a gas station miles back. He had tried to warn me, but I hadn't noticed. Before I could even process what he was saying, the man in my back seat started to move. The door creaked open slowly, and I saw his shadow step out. I froze in terror, unable to move. The other driver grabbed his phone, dialing the police while shouting at me to stay back. I couldn't think. I couldn't speak. Everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. The man from my car looked at us, then bolted into the darkness, disappearing down the side of the highway. I collapsed to the ground, my legs giving out beneath me. The reality of what just happened hit me all at once, and I felt sick. When the police arrived, they searched the area but couldn't find the man. They took our statements, and I was told that I was lucky the other driver had noticed, lucky that I had pulled over. I didn't feel lucky. Even now, days later, I can't stop thinking about it. Every time I get in my car, I check the back seat over and over again. I lock the doors as soon as I sit down, but it doesn't help. The fear is always there, like a shadow that follows me wherever I go. I can't shake the thought of how close I came to something terrible, how easily it could have ended differently. I keep thinking about how I almost didn't pull over. What if I hadn't? Would I have made it home that night? Or would I have become just another tragic story people share as a warning? I'll never know. But what I do know is this: I will never ignore those flashing headlights again. I've been driving for a rideshare service for about 2 years now. Usually it's pretty straightforward: pick up, drop off, repeat. I've seen all types: drunk college kids, tired business people, couples arguing. Nothing surprises me anymore. But last week, something happened that I can't explain, and I'm not sure I'll ever forget it. It was a regular Friday night, the kind where I stay out late to make a little extra money. Around midnight, I got a new ride request. The pickup location was in a quiet residential area, not far from where I was parked. The strange thing was that there wasn't a destination listed, just a note that said, "Drive." I thought maybe it was a glitch in the app or the passenger didn't know how to set the location. It happens sometimes. I accepted the ride anyway, figuring I'd ask them where they wanted to go once they got in the car. When I pulled up, the street was empty. No lights, no people walking around, just silence. I saw a figure standing by the curb, and I knew this must be my passenger. They were tall and dressed in all black, their face hidden by a hood. I waved to get their attention, and they slowly walked over to the car. The door opened, and the person slid into the back seat without a word. I turned my head slightly and asked, "Where are we heading?" The answer was just 2 words: just drive. It's not unusual for people to give vague directions, especially if they've had a bad night or just want to be alone. So I shrugged it off, thinking it was one of those nights. I pulled away from the curb and started driving through the city. The silence in the car was heavy. Normally, I don't mind quiet passengers, but this one made me feel strange. It wasn't just the silence. There was something about the way they sat in the back, not moving, barely even breathing. They stayed in the shadows, avoiding the light from the street lamps that occasionally filtered in through the windows. My rearview mirror barely caught a glimpse of them, but what I could see didn't seem right. I tried to break the tension. "Long night?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. No answer. I glanced at the mirror again. The passenger's face was still hidden, but I could feel their eyes on me. That weird, prickly feeling you get when you know someone is staring. Minutes passed and the silence became unbearable. Finally, the passenger spoke. "Do you know what it's like to be forgotten?" The voice was soft, almost like a whisper, but it sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know how to respond. What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "People like you don't notice us," they said. "We blend in, we disappear." I didn't know what they were talking about, but the way they said it made me feel uneasy. Something about the way they spoke, like they were telling me something important, something I wasn't supposed to understand. As I kept driving, I noticed the streets were emptier than usual. No cars, no people, just dark buildings and empty roads. I checked the time. It was only 12:30, too early for the city to be this dead. The passenger spoke again, their voice even softer now. "I've been in cars like this before. People forget. They don't remember who I am. Sometimes, I don't even remember." I tried to focus on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. I looked in the mirror again, and this time, I swear, for just a second, the passenger's face didn't look human. It was just a flash, like a trick of the light. But their skin seemed too pale, their eyes too dark, their features too sharp. I blinked, and everything looked normal again. I had to be imagining things. Maybe it was the lack of sleep catching up to me, or maybe the shadows were playing tricks on my eyes. I cleared my throat. "Where exactly do you want me to drop you off?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The passenger didn't answer. Instead, they just smiled. A slow, unsettling smile that made my skin crawl. I was done. I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled over to the side of the road and turned around to face them. Look, if you don't tell me where you're going, I can't keep driving you around all night. For the first time, the passenger leaned forward into the light. Their face was still hidden under the hood, but I could see their mouth, twisted into that same eerie smile. I never said I was going anywhere, they whispered. My heart raced. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of there, but my body was frozen. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't think straight. Finally, I reached for the door handle, ready to get out of the car and call the cops. But when I looked back at the passenger, they were gone. The back seat was completely empty, as if they'd never been there. I sat there, staring at the empty seat, my mind racing. How could they just vanish? I was sure they hadn't left the car. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't felt the car shift. I checked my ride history on the app, thinking maybe there'd be some clue. But the ride wasn't there. No record of the pickup, no trace of the passenger. It was like the whole thing never happened. I don't know if I imagined it all, if it was just a bad dream or if something more happened that night. But every time I think about it, I get that same feeling, that chill down my spine, like I'm being watched, like they're still out there, waiting for the next driver to pick them up. I shouldn't have stopped. That's the thought running through my head right now, but it's too late to go back. I was driving home after a long shift, just me and the empty highway, the hum of the engine keeping me company. It was pitch dark, the kind of darkness that makes everything outside your headlights disappear. I wasn't even supposed to be on this road, but the GPS said it was faster, and I trusted it. Big mistake. As I drove, something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was nothing, just the glare from my headlights reflecting off something. But no, there it was, a car just sitting on the side of the road. Its doors were wide open, like someone had gotten out in a hurry and left it there. I slowed down, staring at the vehicle. No one else was around, no other cars, no houses, just trees lining the highway and this abandoned car. I kept going for a few seconds, but my gut told me to stop. Maybe someone needed help. I shouldn't have stopped. The moment I pulled over and killed the engine, everything felt wrong. There was this strange stillness in the air, not even the sound of crickets, just silence. I stepped out of my car, the gravel crunching under my shoes as I approached the other vehicle. The doors, both front and back, were wide open. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but the only answer was more silence. I took a few more steps, peering inside. The first thing I noticed was a phone on the driver's seat. The screen shattered like it had been dropped. The keys were still in the ignition, which seemed odd. Why would someone leave their car with the doors open and the keys still inside? I felt uneasy, like someone was watching me. I turned around, glancing at the trees that hugged the road, but I couldn't see anything. That feeling, though, it was strong. I should have left right then, but curiosity kept me there. I leaned in, looking closer at the phone, but my attention shifted when I caught a strange smell. It wasn't strong, but it was there, something off, like rust or iron. Walking around the car, I saw it. Footprints, fresh ones. They led away from the car into the trees. My gut twisted, telling me not to follow, but my legs moved before I could think it through. Maybe someone was hurt. I had to know. I stepped off the road, following the trail. The trees closed in around me, and it got darker with each step. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the shadows. I kept thinking I'd see someone, that they'd call out, but no one did. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. It wasn't just silent. It felt like the world itself had gone still. That feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every few seconds, I'd glance over my shoulder, convinced I'd see someone standing there, but there was nothing. Then I saw it. Hanging from a branch just ahead was a shirt, a man's shirt, torn and stained dark blood. My heart jumped into my throat. I didn't want to be here anymore. I needed to get out, but before I could turn back, I heard it. Footsteps, soft at first, but they were there, coming from behind me. I froze, trying to make sense of what was happening. The footsteps stopped, and I turned around slowly, shining my flashlight into the trees. Nothing. But I knew someone was there. I could feel it. Panic gripped me. My breathing sped up, and every instinct screamed at me to run. I turned and started back toward the road, trying to keep calm, but my legs were moving faster than my mind. The footsteps followed, closer this time, faster. I didn't dare look back again. I ran, my heart pounding in my ears, lungs burning with every breath. The path back to the highway seemed longer than before, like the trees were closing in on me. I burst out of the woods, gasping for air, and sprinted toward my car. But as I reached it, I stopped dead in my tracks. The doors of my car were wide open. I had locked them. I was sure of it. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. The keys. I had left the keys inside, but now they were gone. I stepped closer, my hand shaking as I shone my light into the car. Empty. Someone had been in my car. Someone had taken the keys. The footsteps behind me stopped. I didn't need to turn around to know what was happening. My stomach twisted in fear. Someone was watching me. They had been following me the whole time. I bolted toward the highway, my only thought being to get away, but I had no idea where to go. There were no other cars, no signs of life, just me, the open road, and whoever was out there. I ran and ran, but I could still feel them behind me, getting closer. I don't know how long I kept going before I stopped. My legs gave out, and I collapsed by the side of the road, gasping for breath, trying to make sense of what just happened. That car, the one I stopped for, it wasn't abandoned. It was bait, and now I was the one being hunted. I was driving home late, way too late for comfort. The highway stretched ahead, dark and almost empty, except for the occasional car passing by. I was exhausted, the kind of tired where your eyelids feel heavy and each mile feels longer than the last. My thoughts kept wandering, mostly about getting home and collapsing into bed. Then I noticed the car behind me. It was close, too close. At first I thought maybe it was just a driver in a hurry. I let it go, trying to focus on the road, but it was hard to ignore how the headlights filled my mirrors. When I changed lanes, the car followed. I didn't think much of it, telling myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe they needed to take the same exit as me, but after a few more minutes, they were still there, matching my every move. When I slowed down, they slowed down. When I sped up, they stayed right behind me, keeping the same distance. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I started to feel uneasy. It's just in your head, I told myself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, very wrong. I tried changing lanes again, and the car followed. That's when the fear really started to creep in. I didn't want to believe it, but it was too obvious now. Whoever was driving that car was following me. I pushed the gas pedal harder, watching the speedometer rise. My heart was racing now, faster than the engine. I took the next exit, hoping to lose them, but as I turned, their headlights appeared in my mirror again. They hadn't let up, not for a second. I made a quick decision and took another turn, trying to get away. I thought maybe if I took enough twists and turns, I could confuse them, make them lose track of me. But no matter where I went, no matter how fast I drove, the car stayed with me, like a shadow that wouldn't go away. Each time I thought I'd shaken them, their headlights showed up again, brighter, closer, more threatening. Panic started to set in. My hands were sweaty on the wheel, my breath coming faster. I reached for my phone to call for help, but the screen stayed black. The battery was dead. Of course, perfect timing. My mind raced. What could I do? I couldn't stop. What? I still can't explain what happened that night. I don't even know if anyone will believe me, but I need to get this out. Maybe someone else has gone through the same thing. It was supposed to be a simple road trip. My girlfriend Lisa and I decided to drive upstate for a weekend getaway. It was late, around 10 p.m., and we were driving on this back road, the kind where you barely see another car for miles. It felt good to be out of the city, fresh air, open road. But the GPS kept cutting out, so we relied on the road signs to make sure we were going the right way. For the first few hours, everything seemed fine. Lisa was playing music softly, the road was mostly straight, and the signs were clear. They kept us on track, like mile markers, counting down the time left until we could finally rest. Then it happened. We passed a sign. I don't remember what it said exactly. Maybe a speed limit or a distance marker. I checked the rearview mirror a few seconds later and the sign was gone. I frowned, rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was too tired. It didn't make sense, but I brushed it off. I didn't tell Lisa because it seemed stupid and I didn't want to worry her. But then, maybe 15 minutes later, another one disappeared. This time, Lisa saw it too. "Didn't we just pass a sign?" she asked, her voice a little tense. I nodded, gripping the steering wheel tighter. I tried to come up with an excuse, like maybe the sign was old, or maybe the darkness was playing tricks on us. We laughed it off, trying to keep things light, but I could feel the air in the car shift. Something wasn't right. The further we drove, the more it happened. Signs weren't just disappearing behind us. They were gone before we even reached them. We'd see them in the distance, but by the time we got close, there was nothing there. Not a trace. No poles, no signs, just empty road. I started to panic. We had no idea where we were, and the landscape looked the same no matter how far we went. Long stretches of road, trees on both sides, no houses or gas stations, no landmarks. It was like the road itself was messing with us. "We should turn back," Lisa said after we passed another mile marker that vanished into thin air. "Something's wrong." I didn't argue. I pulled the car into a quick U-turn, expecting to retrace our path and find the last exit, but the road behind us looked nothing like what we'd just driven. There were no signs. Even the shape of the road felt different, like it had shifted under us. I tried to keep calm, telling myself we just needed to stay focused. Then Lisa said she saw someone standing by the side of the road. I didn't see them, but the way she looked, pale, eyes wide, I believed her. She kept glancing into the rearview mirror as if she expected that figure to follow us. We didn't speak much after that. The real panic set in when both our phones lost signal. I tried to use the map, but the GPS couldn't even pick up our location. It was like we'd driven off the grid entirely. Even the clock on the dashboard reset itself. I had no idea how long we'd been driving anymore. I swear, the road had started to loop. Lisa noticed it too. She recognized a large tree we had passed earlier, and we both saw a sign in the distance that looked painfully familiar. "There's no way," she whispered, her voice shaking. But I knew she was right. We were going in circles. I pulled over, trying to catch my breath, but the silence around us was suffocating. No crickets, no wind, just stillness. It felt like the world had closed in on us, like we were the only ones left. I considered honking the horn or shouting for help, but something in me, instinct maybe, told me not to make a sound. We sat there, in the dark, headlights cutting through nothing but more road. I don't know what we were expecting, but after a few minutes, I couldn't sit still anymore. "We need to keep moving," I told Lisa, though I didn't believe it myself. We started driving again, slower this time. And that's when we saw it. The same sign we had passed hours ago, or what felt like hours ago. It was bent slightly to the left, just like before, and I swear the same scratch was on the metal. "We've been here," Lisa said quietly, her voice flat. I wanted to deny it, to say it was just a coincidence, but deep down, I knew. We were trapped, caught in some endless loop. No matter how far we drove, we'd just end up back where we started. The signs were disappearing, but we were the ones lost. I don't remember how the night ended. We must have driven for hours more, but it's all a blur now. Eventually, as the sky began to lighten, the signs stopped disappearing. The road returned to normal as if nothing had happened. We found a gas station and pulled in, our hands shaking. I didn't say anything to the attendant about what happened. I don't think he would have believed me. Lisa and I don't talk about that night anymore. We haven't taken another road trip since. Even now, every time I see a road sign, I can't help but wonder if it will be the last one I see before everything vanishes again. I've driven through long stretches of empty highway before, but tonight felt different. The road was dark, almost suffocating. It was late, past midnight, and I had been on the road for hours. My eyelids were heavy, my muscles aching from sitting for so long. I kept glancing at the clock, telling myself I could make it to the next town, but when I saw the sign for a rest stop, I knew I had to pull over. I needed a break. Just a few minutes to clear my head, stretch my legs, maybe wash my face. The rest stop was deserted. The parking lot, lit by a few flickering lights, looked like it hadn't been used in years. Only one other car was there, an old sedan with the door slightly open. That detail should have been enough to make me leave, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too tired to care. I pulled into a spot a little further away from the other car, figuring I'd be in and out quickly. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I noticed how quiet it was. No wind, no sound of insects, just silence. It felt wrong, but I shrugged it off. I walked toward the restroom building, which looked as run down as the rest of the place. One of the lights inside was flickering on and off. The air was thick, and the smell, something metallic and stale, hit me as I pushed open the door. Inside, it was worse. The mirrors were cracked, the tiles on the floor chipped and dirty. But that wasn't the worst part. It was the feeling I had, like someone was watching me. I felt a chill down my spine. I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid, that I was alone, and it was all in my head. But as I washed my face in the sink, I heard it, faint, almost like footsteps. I stopped moving, listening carefully. The sound was gone. I looked up at the mirror and, for a second, I thought I saw something behind me, a shape, a shadow. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing. Just empty stalls and the same flickering light. I cursed under my breath. I was so tired I was starting to imagine things. That had to be it. I wiped my face with a paper towel, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling, and left the restroom as fast as I could. As I walked back to my car, I noticed something strange. The doors of the old sedan, the ones that were open before, were now shut. I stopped in my tracks, staring at it. Had someone closed them while I was in the restroom? I hadn't seen anyone around when I arrived, but now I wasn't so sure. I felt my heart start to pound, and I quickened my pace toward my own car. I wanted to leave, to get back on the road, away from this place. That's when I heard it. A soft click, like a car door closing. My blood turned to ice. I turned toward the sound, eyes scanning the parking lot, but everything looked the same, except for a flicker of movement near the old sedan. There was someone there, moving between the shadows. I rushed to my car, my hands shaking as I unlocked the door. I jumped inside and locked the doors behind me, my chest tight with fear. I looked around, trying to see where the figure had gone, but the dim lights made it hard to make out anything clearly. Still, I could sense them. Someone was watching me. My skin prickled with the realization that I wasn't alone. I fumbled with my keys, trying to start the car. It wouldn't turn over. I twisted the key again and again, but the engine refused to start. Panic surged through me. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel, my breaths coming out in short, desperate gasps. My eyes darted toward the old sedan. A figure was slowly stepping into the dim light now, moving toward me. They were too far away to see clearly, but I knew they were coming closer, and I had no idea what they wanted. Sweat dripped down my forehead as I turned the key again, praying the car would start. My mind was racing. Who was this person? Why were they at this rest stop in the middle of the night? Why hadn't I seen them before? A dozen thoughts rushed through my head, each one more terrifying than the last. Was this a setup? Was I the target of some twisted plan? Just when I thought I was out of time, headlights cut through the darkness. A car was pulling into the rest stop, its lights flooding the parking lot. The figure near the old sedan froze, then backed into the shadows, disappearing from view. My car roared to life, and I didn't wait to question what had just happened. I hit the gas, tearing out of the rest stop, my heart pounding in my ears. As I sped down the highway, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the figure following me. But there was nothing. Just the empty road and the fading lights of the rest stop behind me. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I was safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something terrible. The last thing I saw before I rounded the bend was the shadow of that figure standing by the old sedan, watching me drive away. I don't know what would have happened if that other car hadn't shown up. Maybe it was all in my head, just paranoia from being overtired. Or maybe I wasn't as lucky as I thought. Even now, I can't stop thinking about it. About how close I came to something. Something I can't explain, but something real. The kind of danger that sticks with you, that makes you think twice before stopping at a place like that again. I was driving late that night, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place where you don't see another car for hours. My fuel gauge had been slowly creeping toward empty, and I started to wonder if I'd make it to the next town. When the dim lights of a gas station appeared in the distance, it felt like a miracle. I pulled in, relieved, but something about the place made me uneasy. It was too quiet. There were no other cars, no signs of life, just the humming of the neon sign, flickering above like it hadn't been repaired in years. The station was old, the pumps rusted, the windows dusty and dark. I stepped out of the car, and that's when I saw him. The attendant. He seemed to come out of nowhere, like he was just standing in the shadows waiting for me. He was tall, but hunched, wearing a faded uniform that looked like it hadn't been washed in days, maybe weeks. His face was hard to see under the cap he wore low, but what I did see unsettled me. His eyes never really met mine. They darted around, like he was looking for something else. "Fill it up?" I asked, breaking the silence, trying to sound casual. He just nodded, slow and stiff, and started pumping gas without saying a word. His movements were deliberate, too slow, like he didn't care how long it took. I thought about asking him how far the next town was, but something in me told me to keep quiet. While he worked, I glanced around, trying to distract myself from the weird feeling crawling up my spine. That's when I noticed the markings on the walls of the station. At first, they looked like scratches or old graffiti, but when I looked closer, they seemed wrong. They were random, almost like symbols, but not ones I recognized. And on the ground near the side of the building, I saw something dark and faded. Stains. I didn't want to think about what they might be. The gas pump clicked, and the man stopped, but he didn't move. He just stood there, one hand still on the nozzle, staring at the ground. I felt a surge of discomfort. I asked, "How much do I owe you?" My voice sounded too loud in the stillness. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, it was slow, like he was carefully choosing his words. "You sure you want to keep going?" His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken in a while. I forced a laugh, though nothing was funny. "Yeah, just passing through." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes still not quite meeting mine. Then he pointed toward the station's small store. "Pay inside." I hesitated. The last thing I wanted to do was go into that grimy building, but I didn't see another option. I walked in, the door creaking loudly behind me. Inside, it was worse than I expected. The lights were dim, buzzing faintly overhead, casting long shadows across the room. The shelves were mostly empty, and what little was there looked expired. But it was the posters on the wall that caught my attention. Faces, missing people. Some were old, the paper yellowed with age, but others were newer. Too new. My heart raced as I quickly looked around. There were no security cameras, nothing that suggested anyone was keeping an eye on this place. Except for the knife behind the counter, laying casually next to the register. It wasn't a small kitchen knife either. It was big, sharp, and out of place. I turned to leave, but the attendant was suddenly there, blocking the doorway. He was staring at me, this time directly, and his eyes were cold. "You sure you want to go?" he asked again, but this time, it didn't feel like a question. It felt like a warning. Every instinct in me screamed to run. "I forgot something in the car," I stammered, stepping around him, trying not to make it obvious how fast my heart was beating. His eyes followed me, but he didn't move. I forced myself to walk calmly until I got outside. Then I sprinted to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I could hear him behind me, slow footsteps, getting closer. The engine finally roared to life, and I slammed the car into gear. As I sped away, I caught a glimpse of the attendant standing by the pump, watching me, his face unreadable. But what really made my blood run cold was the van parked behind the station, hidden from view when I first arrived. It was old, rusted, with its back doors open, and inside, the dark stains I saw earlier seemed more obvious now. I didn't stop driving. I didn't care how far the next town was. My hands were shaking so hard I almost lost control a few times, but I just kept driving, trying to get away from that place. I didn't know if he was following me, and I wasn't going to risk finding out. When I finally made it to the next town, I reported the gas station to the police. I told them everything about the creepy attendant, the strange markings, the missing posters, and the van. They promised to check it out and asked me to come with them the next day. But when we got back to where the gas station had been, it was gone. The lot was empty, overgrown with weeds, no pumps, no building, no sign that anyone had been there for years. The officer looked at me like I was crazy, but I know what I saw. I don't drive through isolated areas at night anymore. Sometimes I think about that station, and I wonder if I was just lucky, or if there were others who weren't. It started as just another late-night drive. I had stayed longer than I expected at a friend's place and found myself heading home around 1 a.m. The road was empty, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural. The car's headlights sliced through the darkness, but it still felt like the night was closing in on me. The only sound was the low hum of the engine, and it felt like even that was swallowed by the night. I've never liked driving at night. There's something about the shadows that makes everything feel more sinister. Tonight was no different. I tried to shake off the strange feeling creeping up my spine. Maybe it was just because I was tired, I thought. But then I noticed something. Up ahead, on the side of the road, there was a figure, just standing there, so close to the road it seemed like they might step in front of the car. They were wearing dark clothes, making it hard to see them clearly, but I could feel their eyes on me, watching. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as I passed. I told myself it was nothing, probably just some guy waiting for a ride or something. But who waits on an empty road at 1 a.m.? That question stuck with me as I drove further. I couldn't get the image of that figure out of my head. The way they stood so still, like they had been waiting for me. A few miles later, I saw them again. This time, they were closer, much closer. They were standing almost in the middle of the road, forcing me to swerve a little to avoid hitting them. My heart raced. There was no way I had passed them twice. It had to be a different person. It had to be. But deep down, I knew. It was the same figure, the same dark clothes, the same unnerving stillness. I pressed my foot harder on the gas pedal. I didn't look back. I didn't want to, but I felt it, like they were following me, even though I didn't see them. I kept driving, trying to calm myself down. It was just a coincidence, I told myself. It was late and I was tired. My mind was playing tricks on me, but then I saw them again, standing at the next intersection. No, it wasn't possible. This time, I glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing. But when I looked back to the road ahead, they were there. Closer now, like they were stepping out from the shadows, each time getting nearer. My throat felt tight, and my hands were shaking. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't sure if I was seeing things or if this was real. The figure was following me. I took random turns, driving down streets I didn't even recognize, trying to lose them. But every time I thought I was safe, I'd spot them again, always ahead, always waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were everywhere. I started to wonder if I was losing it. Was this real? Could someone really be following me like this without me noticing how they got there? At some point, I ended up on a road with no lights, completely alone. Or at least, I thought I was. That's when I saw the red light up ahead. It was the only light on that long stretch of road. The figure appeared again, this time behind me. In the mirror, I could see them walking towards the car. They were getting closer and closer. I didn't know what to do. My mind was screaming to run the red light, but what if someone was coming? What if I didn't care anymore? I slammed my foot on the gas and ran the light. My heart was pounding, and I was breathing too fast, like I couldn't get enough air. I didn't see them in the mirror anymore, but I knew they were still out there. I drove straight home. My hands were still shaking as I turned into the driveway. For a second, I allowed myself to believe it was over. Maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe it was just some creepy guy, and now I was safe. But as I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car, I felt it again, that cold, sinking feeling of being watched. Slowly, I looked up. And there they were, standing at the edge of my driveway, just staring at me. They didn't move. They didn't say anything. Just stood there, like they had been waiting for me all along. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, before I ran into the house and locked every door and window. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. I wanted to call the police, but what would I tell them? That someone had followed me home? That I kept seeing the same person over and over? It sounded crazy. Even now, I can't explain it. I haven't seen the figure again, but I still feel like they're out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. I don't know what they want or why they followed me, but I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, that one night they'll be back. Last weekend, my wife and I made a wrong turn on a road trip that I still can't fully process. I've been trying to figure out what happened, but the whole night feels like a bad dream, one I can't shake off. I guess telling this here might help. I don't know. Maybe someone will believe me. Maybe someone's gone through the same thing. We'd been driving all day. We had one of those GPS issues where the signal dropped, and I thought I knew a shortcut. Big mistake. Before I realized it, we were off the main highway and stuck on this narrow country road, surrounded by trees. It was getting late, and the sun had already dipped below the horizon. The sky was this dark, empty color, and the only light came from our headlights. I kept telling my wife we'd find our way back soon, but even I wasn't sure anymore. The trees seemed to close in, and there were no street lights, no signs, not even another car in sight. My phone had no signal, and the quiet was strange. You know that feeling when everything's too still? It was like that. I turned on the radio to fill the silence, but it didn't help. We drove for maybe 20 minutes when I noticed headlights behind us. I didn't think much of it at first. It was just a car. But after a few minutes, my wife pointed out something weird. The car didn't have its headlights on. It was just following us with only its parking lights, dim and barely visible. It was far back at first, but then it started creeping closer. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was probably just an old car with bad lights. No big deal. But as the road went on, I couldn't shake this feeling. The car was still there, still following, never passing. I sped up a little just to see what it would do, and it sped up too, keeping the same distance. I could feel my wife getting tense next to me. She was trying not to panic, but I knew she was scared. And I was too, but I didn't want to show it. After what felt like forever, the car was practically tailgating us, only a few feet away. No lights, no sign of stopping. I slammed the gas, trying to put some distance between us, but the road was tight, curving left and right with no room for mistakes. Every time I looked in the mirror, the car was there, closer, like it was breathing down my neck. That's when it hit me. Whoever was driving wasn't just messing around. They were after us. My wife asked if we should stop and let them pass, but there was nowhere to pull over. No shoulders, no side roads, nothing but trees and darkness. And stopping didn't feel like a good idea. Whoever was behind us, they weren't just in a hurry, they were hunting us. The car suddenly surged forward, nearly slamming into us. I swerved, barely avoiding the ditch, and my heart was racing. I tried to get control, but it was no use. The road twisted, and every turn felt like a trap. I didn't know what they wanted, but they weren't giving up. We kept driving like this, me pushing the car to its limit, trying to outrun them. My hands were shaking, and my wife was gripping the seat so tight her knuckles were white. I kept looking for any sign of help, anything. I just wanted to get away. After what felt like an hour, we saw a light up ahead, a gas station. It was small, old, barely lit, but it was the first sign of life we'd seen in miles. I thought maybe we could pull in there, find someone, call for help. But as we got closer to the station, something changed. The car that had been tailing us, pushing us to the edge, just vanished. 1 second it was there, the next, gone. I didn't see it turn off or slow down. It was just gone, like it had never been there. We pulled into the gas station, both of us shaken, trying to catch our breath. I didn't care how old or creepy the place looked. We just needed to stop, to think, to figure out what had just happened. The gas station attendant came out. He was an older guy, wrinkled, with a cigarette hanging from his lips. I asked him if he'd seen any cars pass by, described the one that had been following us. He just shook his head, told me no one had driven past in hours. He hadn't seen any cars, nothing. I laughed it off at first, said maybe we'd lost them before we reached the station. But my wife, she didn't look convinced. She was pale, still shaking. And honestly, I felt it too. That chill in my bones, the kind you get when something isn't right. We stayed at the station for a bit, long enough to calm down. I told myself it was over. We'd been lucky. But as we left, heading back to the main road, my headlights caught something on the asphalt. Tire marks, fresh ones. They were sharp, wild, like someone had been driving recklessly. I didn't say anything to my wife, didn't want to freak her out more, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Those tire marks, the car, the way it disappeared without a trace. Now, every time I drive at night, I check my mirrors, half expecting to see those dim lights again, creeping closer. I tell myself it was just a crazy driver, that we were lucky to get away. But part of me wonders if it's not over. Maybe they're still out there. Maybe they're watching, waiting for the next wrong turn. I don't usually take shortcuts. I mean, it's not worth the risk when you don't know the area. But last night, I was tired. It was late, past midnight, and I just wanted to get home. I had been driving for hours, and the thought of shaving 20 minutes off my trip was too tempting. The GPS showed a small bridge ahead, and instead of staying on the main highway, I followed its suggestion. The bridge looked old, like it hadn't seen much use in years, but my car could handle it. I didn't see any signs saying not to cross, and I figured it would be fine. Besides, there was no traffic, no noise, nothing but silence around me. It felt like I was the only person on the road. I drove onto the bridge, feeling the soft hum of the tires over the wooden planks. There was something unsettling about the place, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the fog rolling in, or the way the wind seemed to stop as soon as I entered. The bridge felt longer than it looked on the GPS. Halfway across, the GPS screen froze. I tapped it a few times, thinking it was just a glitch, but it wouldn't update. Great, I thought. But I kept driving forward, expecting the road to continue on the other side. Only when I reached the end, there was no road, just grass, tall, overgrown weeds that stretched out as far as I could see. The bridge didn't lead anywhere. I stopped the car, staring in disbelief. My first thought was to turn around, but before I could shift into reverse, I heard something. Footsteps. I wasn't sure at first, but then they grew louder, more distinct, like someone, or maybe more than one person, was walking towards me. I turned my head, scanning the area, but there was nothing. Just shadows in the fog, but they were moving. I swear I saw them. I told myself I was being paranoid. Too many hours on the road, maybe I was imagining things. But the footsteps didn't stop, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I got out of the car. I don't know why. I thought maybe I could figure out where I went wrong if there was a road I missed. But the moment I stepped onto the grass, I heard whispering, not far away. My heart raced. I turned around quickly, hoping to spot whoever it was, but I only saw dark shapes flickering in the fog. They weren't random people. There was something about the way they moved, organized, purposeful, like they were waiting for me. I felt trapped, like the car was a cage, and these figures were closing in. I rushed back to the car and slammed the door shut, locking it. The footsteps came closer. I could see them now, shadows turning into figures. There were 4 or 5 of them surrounding the car, their faces hidden. They didn't look worried, though. No, they were calm, like they knew I had nowhere to go. One of them stepped forward, smiling. He tapped the window, lightly at first, then harder. I could see the grin on his face, twisted, like he was enjoying this. My mind raced. I thought about driving back across the bridge, but when I looked behind me, the entrance was blocked. 2 more figures stood there, just watching. I couldn't go forward, couldn't go back. They had me. The guy at the window leaned in, staring at me through the glass. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I could tell they wanted me out of the car, but I wasn't about to give them that chance. Panic set in. I scanned the area again, desperate for a way out. That's when I saw it. A narrow footpath, barely visible, running alongside the bridge and disappearing into the woods. It wasn't much, but it was the only option I had. I couldn't stay in the car, so I grabbed my keys, pushed open the door, and ran. I didn't care where I was going as long as it wasn't there. The figures reacted immediately. I heard them shouting now, footsteps pounding behind me as they chased. My heart was in my throat as I sprinted down the path, the sound of leaves crunching under my feet, branches whipping against my face. The fog made it hard to see, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The path twisted and turned, and I kept running, hoping I'd lose them in the trees. Every so often, I'd hear them behind me, getting closer, but then it would fade, like they were playing with me, giving me hope before closing in again. I ducked behind a tree, trying to catch my breath, trying to listen. Everything went quiet for a moment. Just the sound of my own breathing, ragged and uneven. Maybe I'd lost them, I thought. Maybe I could double back, find a way out. But then I heard a sound that froze me in place. The bridge. I don't know how, but I had run in a circle. I was back at the same damn bridge. I stumbled out of the trees, staring in disbelief. There was the car, just as I had left it, and the figures were standing there, waiting. They hadn't even bothered to follow me. They knew I'd end up right back where I started. I had no way out. I stood there, my chest heaving, watching them watch me. The smile on the guy's face was wider now, like he was enjoying this twisted game. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was trapped. The bridge didn't lead anywhere, just like the path didn't lead anywhere. It was all the same. And I realized then, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, that I wasn't going to make it out of there. I shouldn't have stayed so late at the office, but there was a deadline. By the time I left, it was almost midnight. I was exhausted, but all I could think about was getting home. My mind was foggy, and the empty road didn't help. I must have missed my usual turn because suddenly, the area around me didn't look familiar anymore. Dark trees loomed on either side of the narrow road, and my GPS had stopped working miles ago. The night felt thicker out here, the silence pressing down on me. I told myself I'd get home soon. Just follow the road and it'll connect somewhere. But it didn't. After a few minutes, the road came to an abrupt stop, a dead end, just like that. I groaned and threw my car into reverse, cursing myself for being so careless. I had to turn around and find another way, but just as I started backing up, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. 2 cars blocking the road behind me. I froze. 3 men got out of the cars, their faces hidden behind strange plain masks. They didn't say anything, didn't make any sudden moves. They just stood there in the middle of the road staring at me. Or at least it felt like they were staring. The night around me seemed to close in, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. My first thought was, they must be messing with me, right? Just some prank. I laughed nervously, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles turned white. But the men didn't laugh. They didn't do anything. They just stood there. I locked my doors, trying to stay calm, but panic was slowly rising inside me. Why weren't they doing anything? Why weren't they leaving? I thought about what to do next. The road was too narrow to turn around without reversing first, and they were in the way. I could see the side road I passed a few minutes ago in my mind, but it was far behind them now. Would they let me back out? Could I even get around them? One of the men stepped closer, dragging something metallic along the ground, and it clinked against the pavement. My heart raced, beating so fast it felt like it might explode. What did they want? No one said anything, but the tension was unbearable, like waiting for something awful to happen, except I didn't know what. I needed to leave. Now. I slammed the gear into reverse and hit the gas. The car lurched backward, tires screeching as I whipped the steering wheel around. I barely missed hitting the man standing closest to my car, and he didn't even flinch. The others didn't move either. The headlights from their cars bounced in my rearview mirror as I sped backward down the narrow road, praying I wouldn't crash. My pulse pounded in my ears, and my hands shook as I fought to control the car. The road stretched out ahead, but I knew there wasn't much time before they'd come after me. They had to. As I neared the side road, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. It was my only chance. Without slowing down, I spun the wheel hard and swerved onto the side road. The tires skidded on the loose gravel, but I straightened out and floored it. The engine roared, and the trees rushed past, a blur of blackness on either side. For a moment, I thought I'd lost them. I didn't see any headlights behind me. I kept glancing in the mirror, expecting to see them any second, but the road was empty. I started to breathe again, my heart still racing, but at least I was getting away. Just keep going, I told myself. Find the main road. Then, far ahead, more headlights appeared. Another car parked sideways, blocking the narrow road. I slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched, the car swerved again, and I barely came to a stop before hitting the other vehicle. My breath came in short gasps, panic bubbling back up. How did they get ahead of me? I was trapped. The headlights behind me were back now, shining brighter, getting closer. I was surrounded. I looked around frantically. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to turn. The road was too narrow to make any sharp moves. The car blocking me hadn't moved, and I could see someone inside. Another masked figure just sitting there, waiting. I looked behind again, and the other cars were approaching slowly, deliberately. I was stuck. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced, and I fumbled with my phone, but there was no signal. The reality hit me like a punch in the gut. I couldn't call for help. I was alone out here, on some random back road in the middle of the night. No one's coming. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears again, louder than ever. My body was frozen, hands gripping the steering wheel as if it could save me. The headlights grew brighter, and then I saw them. The three men were walking toward my car now. They moved slowly, no rush, like they had all the time in the world. One of them dragged that metallic object again, the sound scratching at my nerves. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Footsteps, slow, steady. They were coming closer. The headlights made everything look strange, shadows stretching across the ground like something alive. I knew I couldn't stay here, but I didn't know how to escape. There was no way out. And then the footsteps stopped, right next to my window. That's when I heard the soft tap against the glass, and the figure outside leaned in close. The mask covered their face, but I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. The story ends here because that's all I remember. Everything after that is a blur, like a nightmare I can't wake up from. I was driving home late that night, enjoying the empty road and the peace that came with it. The headlights of my car cut through the darkness, and I felt good, free in a way. It was just me and the road, no one else around. Or, at least, that's what I thought. Then I noticed them, a line of blacked out vehicles, no lights on, just dark shapes in my rearview mirror. At first I didn't think much about it. Probably some group heading somewhere late, maybe trucks or something. But as the minutes passed, I realized they were staying right behind me. Not one or two cars, but at least 3 or 4, all moving together, like some kind of convoy. It wasn't normal. I switched lanes, slowed down a little, just to see if they'd pass, but they didn't. They stayed there, keeping the same distance, matching my speed, my movements. My heart began to beat a little faster. I told myself I was overreacting. It was probably nothing, but deep down, I could feel it. Something wasn't right. I pushed the gas pedal harder, trying to put some space between us. The speedometer crept up, 60, 70, 80 miles per hour, and I thought I'd lost them. But when I glanced back, they were still there, following me just as close, their headlights still off. Fear began to rise in my chest. What did they want? I took an exit, one I hadn't planned to take, hoping it would throw them off, but they followed, all of them. The road became narrower, and I turned into side streets, sharp turns. Anything to shake them off. It didn't work. They were getting closer now, their cars nearly touching mine. My hands were sweating on the wheel, my heart pounding in my ears. I couldn't shake the thought that this wasn't some random thing. They were after me, but I didn't know why. I didn't know where I was anymore. The streets were unfamiliar, and I was losing control. The road was barely lit, just the glow of my headlights and the shadows closing in behind me. Panic took over. I decided to pull over. Maybe they'd pass. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was all just some messed up coincidence. I pulled over to the side of the road, my car barely stopping before they surrounded me. They didn't keep driving. They stopped too. I could see their outlines through the darkness. Black shapes, cars all around me. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. Of course, out here, in the middle of nowhere, with no way to call for help. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then one of the car's doors opened, and someone got out. A tall figure, walking slowly toward my car. My mind was racing, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen, fear taking over every part of me. I thought about running, getting out of the car and just sprinting into the trees, but something told me that wouldn't work. The figure reached my window, and I rolled it down just a little, not sure what I expected. They didn't speak. They didn't even look angry. Instead, they handed me a phone. A simple, black phone. My hand shook as I took it. The person backed away, and I heard a voice on the other end, calm, too calm. "You've seen too much," the voice said. "We can't let you go now." I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. I didn't even know what they were talking about. I hadn't seen anything, but I didn't say anything. The voice continued, explaining that the convoy was part of something big, something I had stumbled into by accident. They didn't care that I wasn't involved. They only cared that now I knew they existed. My mind raced, trying to figure out what they meant. Maybe I'd seen something earlier and didn't realize. Maybe it was just because I was on this road at the wrong time. I didn't know. But they made it clear. There was no going back. They couldn't let me walk away. The call ended. The person who gave me the phone stood there for a moment longer, looking at me with cold, empty eyes. I thought this was the end, that they'd pull me out of the car and that would be it. But they didn't. Instead, the figure leaned in and said, "We'll find you again." Then they turned, walked back to their car, and the convoy started to pull away, one by one, until I was left alone on the side of the road. For a long time, I just sat there, staring into the dark, trying to make sense of it. My body was shaking, my mind buzzing with thoughts I couldn't control. I was still alive, but I knew it wasn't over. I got back on the road, trying to find my way home, but nothing felt right anymore. My eyes kept flicking to the mirrors, expecting to see those cars again, waiting for them to return. Even now, days later, I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, watching, waiting. I don't know when they'll come back, but I know they will. I've stopped driving at night, but I don't think it matters. They said they'd find me, and I believe them. Now, every time I'm alone, every time I hear a car engine behind me, my heart skips a beat. I can't trust anything anymore. Maybe it's all in my head, or maybe they're just waiting for the right moment to make sure I disappear for good. I wish I knew how it ends, but I don't. I drive trucks for a living. Long, empty roads, just me and the highway. It can be lonely, but I like it. No bosses looking over my shoulder, no deadlines except the clock. The night shift is my favorite, something about the dark and the quiet. But last night was different. I had a delivery to make, some parts for a warehouse out in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place that doesn't show up on GPS, just a dot on the map somewhere past the last gas station for miles. It was around midnight and the road was dead. No cars, no trucks, nothing. I'd been driving for hours and my eyes were starting to feel heavy, but I was still good to go. I wanted to get the job done and sleep at the drop-off. It wasn't until I noticed something weird up ahead that I snapped out of my daze. Headlights, but not just one set. There were several, all lined up in a straight line. As I got closer, I could make out a convoy of trucks, big rigs, just like mine. Same model, too. What was odd was that they all looked exactly the same. Same color, same shape. And when I checked their license plates, they were the same, too. I thought maybe I was just tired, you know? Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But the more I followed them, the more it started to get to me. I figured maybe it was some weird company thing, but why here? Why on this empty road? Then, one of the trucks just disappeared. No warning, no brake lights. It was there 1 second, then it was gone the next. I slowed down, thinking maybe it had taken an exit, but there wasn't one. The road just kept going straight. I looked around. Nothing. It didn't make sense, but I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just fog or something. Then another truck vanished, just like the first, gone without a trace. My stomach dropped. This wasn't right. Trucks don't just disappear. I sped up, hoping to get closer to the remaining ones, to see if I could figure out what was going on. But before I could catch up, another one blinked out of existence. Panic started to creep in. My heart was racing now. I checked my rearview mirror, expecting to see something behind me, but it was just black. The kind of black that swallows everything. I was the only one left on the road, and I didn't like it. I grabbed my radio, hoping to call for help. Maybe another driver could explain this, or at least keep me company. But when I turned it on, all I got was static. I switched channels, but it was no use. My phone didn't have a signal either. Typical, right? Stuck in the middle of nowhere, and nothing works. The worst part? My fuel gauge. It had been fine, showing I had enough gas to make it to my stop, but suddenly, it was dropping fast, way too fast. I was running out of time, and I had no idea what I was running from. I started to feel it then, like someone was watching me. Not just watching, following. Every time I glanced in the mirror, I felt like something was there, just out of sight, hiding in the darkness behind me. But whenever I turned around, it was just the same empty road. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was all in my head. I just needed to get to the next town, that's all. But I couldn't get over how those trucks vanished, and why was I the only one left? I pushed the pedal down, trying to put as much distance between me and whatever was going on. The engine roared, but then, out of nowhere, the whole truck jolted, like something had grabbed it. My seatbelt cut into my chest as I was thrown forward. I slammed the brakes, but the truck wouldn't stop. It just kept pulling forward, even though my foot was glued to the brake. The headlights flickered, casting strange shadows on the road. For a split second, I thought I saw the outline of something big, but when the light steadied, there was nothing. Just the road stretching on, empty and silent. And then, everything stopped. The truck was still, the engine idling quietly. The road ahead was clear. No more trucks, no sign of anything strange. I sat there, trying to catch my breath, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I thought it was over. I even laughed a little, like it was all just some crazy dream, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The road might have been empty, but it didn't feel that way. It felt like I was the one who was disappearing, like the space around me was swallowing me whole. I put the truck in gear and started moving again, slower this time. But every few minutes, I checked the mirrors, expecting to see something behind me, and every time, I saw nothing but that endless, dark road. I made it to the warehouse just before dawn, dropped off the load, signed the paperwork, all normal stuff. But when I got back to my truck, something was off. My truck looked the same, but when I checked the license plate, it wasn't mine. It was the same as those trucks I'd followed the night before. The same plate. Now, every time I drive that stretch of road, I can't help but feel like I'm part of that convoy, like I'm next in line to vanish. And maybe, just maybe, I already have. We had been driving for hours, the empty road stretching out endlessly in front of us. The only light came from our car's headlights and the faint moon hiding behind clouds. I kept glancing at the gas gauge, watching the needle dip closer to empty. We hadn't passed a gas station in miles and it was getting late. "I think we should have filled up back there," my girlfriend whispered, her voice tense. I didn't say anything, just kept driving. I hoped there would be a gas station soon, but there wasn't. After another 20 minutes, the engine sputtered and died. We were in the middle of nowhere, trees on both sides, the road completely deserted. I pulled over to the side and switched off the car. The silence that followed was deafening. There was no signal on either of our phones. "We're stuck," I muttered, feeling a knot form in my stomach. I tried to laugh it off, but it didn't feel funny. We were stranded, and there was nothing around for miles. We waited in the car, hoping another vehicle would come by. The hours dragged on, and I could feel the unease growing between us. Just when I started to think we would be there all night, headlights appeared in the distance. A beat-up truck slowed down and pulled up next to us. An older man rolled down his window and smiled at us. He had gray hair and a wrinkled face, but there was something off about him. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Need some help?" he asked. We exchanged glances. It wasn't like we had many options, so I nodded. "Yeah, we ran out of gas. Is there a station nearby?" The man scratched his chin, then shook his head. "Not for miles, but I keep some gas at my place, just up the road. I can give you a lift." I didn't like the idea of leaving the car, but we had no choice. We climbed into the back of his truck. It smelled like old leather and something I couldn't quite place. As we drove, the man talked, but I wasn't listening. The road twisted and turned, becoming narrower. Trees grew closer, and the shadows between them seemed to stretch out like fingers. The unease in my chest grew stronger with each minute. I noticed my girlfriend looking at me, eyes wide, clearly nervous too. "So, you guys been out here long?" the man asked, glancing at us through the rearview mirror. Yeah, a couple of hours," I replied, trying to sound casual. But inside, something was screaming at me that this wasn't right. Eventually we stopped, but we weren't at a gas station. We were in front of an old run-down house hidden deep in the woods. The man got out, motioning for us to follow. I hesitated. My girlfriend grabbed my hand. "Something's wrong," she whispered. I nodded but didn't know what else we could do. We followed him to a small shed next to the house. The place was eerie, too quiet. I noticed tools hanging on the walls. Some were covered in dark stains that made my stomach churn. My girlfriend tugged at my arm again, her face pale. "There's no gas here, is there?" she said, her voice shaky. The man turned to us, that fake smile now completely gone. His face had changed, cold and empty. He reached into the shed and pulled out a wrench. "I'm afraid you're not leaving here," he said softly, stepping closer. Panic shot through me. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand and bolted, running blindly into the woods. Behind us, I could hear him following, the crunch of his boots on the ground growing closer. "Keep running," I yelled, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I didn't know where we were going, but we had to get away. The trees blurred past us, and I could feel my legs burning, but I didn't dare stop. Suddenly, my girlfriend tripped, falling hard to the ground. I reached down to pull her up, but it was too late. The man was there, standing over us, his expression dark and menacing. "You're not the first," he said, his voice low, "and you won't be the last." I looked around, desperate for something, anything to help us. My hands found a large rock, and without thinking, I swung it at him. He stumbled back, groaning in pain. I grabbed my girlfriend, and we ran again, the sound of him cursing behind us. We finally broke through the trees and found ourselves back on the road. For a moment, I thought we were safe. Then, headlights appeared in the distance. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last. As the car came closer, I saw more people inside, smiling, watching us with that same cold look the man had. They were with him. My heart sank as I realized there was no escape. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a trap, and we had fallen right into it. The car slowed down, the door opened, and the last thing I remember is my girlfriend's terrified scream before everything went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I woke up, I was alone. The car, the people, even my girlfriend, they were all gone. The road was empty again, just like before. My head throbbed and my body ached, but I was alive. I walked for what felt like hours until another car finally appeared. This time, I didn't wave for help. I just kept walking. The fear of what happened burned into my mind. I don't know what they did with her. I don't know why they let me go. But I do know one thing. I'll never trust a friendly stranger again. No cell service. I didn't think much of it when the car broke down. Cars break down. That's normal, right? I mean, it's just bad luck. But as I stood there, staring at the empty road stretching ahead and behind me, I felt something sink in my stomach. No one had driven by for hours, not a single car. My phone, of course, had no service. The sun was sinking lower, casting long shadows over the empty fields. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but the whispering wind for company. At first, I thought I could just wait. Maybe someone would come by. I leaned against the hood of my car, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of an engine. I straightened up, waving my arms like a crazy person. Finally, a rusty old pickup truck slowed down as it approached me. The driver, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard and a faded baseball cap, rolled down his window. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice rough, almost casual. "Yeah, won't start, and no cell service," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced at my car, then back at me, scratching his chin. "I know a mechanic not too far from here," he said, "but it's a bit of a drive. I can take you." I hesitated. Something about him felt off. Maybe it was the way he was too calm about the whole situation, or how his eyes lingered a little too long. But what choice did I have? The sun was almost gone, and I wasn't about to spend the night out here alone. I forced a smile and nodded. "Sure, thanks." I grabbed my backpack from the car and climbed into his truck. The smell hit me first. Oil, gasoline, and something I couldn't place. Something sour. I sat stiffly, trying not to breathe too deeply. The guy shifted the truck into gear, and we pulled onto the road. For the first few minutes, we didn't talk. The engine's hum filled the silence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The road felt endless, and the fields outside the window seemed to blur together. "So, where are you headed?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Just passing through," I replied, hoping to keep things vague. He nodded, then started asking more questions. "You got family around here? Friends?" I shook my head. "No, just traveling." He grunted, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. His questions became more personal. Did I live alone? Was anyone expecting me? The pit in my stomach grew heavier with each word. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But the road, it was taking too long. I glanced at the dashboard. The clock said we'd been driving for over an hour, but the man hadn't mentioned the mechanic again. My heart pounded in my chest. I casually asked, "So, how far did you say this mechanic was?" He didn't answer right away, his eyes fixed on the road. "Not far now," he muttered, but his tone had changed. There was no warmth in it, no reassurance. I shifted in my seat, my eyes darting around the truck. That's when I noticed it. In the back seat, half hidden under a dirty blanket, there were tools. Not just regular tools. There was a crowbar, duct tape, and a coil of rope. My breath caught in my throat. My mind raced. Maybe he was just prepared. Maybe he used those for work. But then the smell hit me again, that sour, rotten scent. My chest tightened. Something was very, very wrong. I had to get out. But we were in the middle of nowhere, and the man's eyes kept flicking toward me as if he knew I'd figured something out. "We should be close now," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked. The man didn't respond. Instead, he turned the truck off the main road onto a narrow dirt path that led into the woods. My pulse raced. "What are you doing?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. He finally looked at me, his expression cold, almost bored. "Shortcut," he said flatly. No, this wasn't a shortcut. This was a trap. My hand reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was jammed. "Let me out," I said, louder this time. The man glanced at me, then back at the road. "Calm down," he said. "It'll be fine." But I wasn't waiting to find out what his idea of fine was. I yanked at the handle again, but it didn't move. My heart pounded in my ears. "Let me out," I shouted, my voice shaking with fear. His eyes darkened, his grip tightening on the wheel. "You're not going anywhere," he said quietly. That was it. I wasn't going to wait for whatever he had planned. In a burst of panic, I kicked the door over and over until the lock finally gave way. The door flew open, and I threw myself out of the moving truck. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting through my body as I rolled into the dirt. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The truck skidded to a stop, and I heard the man's door open. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline pushing me forward. I ran, not looking back, not stopping. The trees blurred around me as I sprinted toward the distant sound of a road. I don't know how long I ran before I reached it, the main road where my car still sat in the distance. My chest burned, my legs felt like they would give out, but I didn't stop. Finally, I reached my car and collapsed against it, gasping for air. But before I could even catch my breath, I heard the sound of another engine. A car slowed down beside me, and I froze. The window rolled down. It was him. Only now, he was in a different vehicle. He smiled. "Need a lift?" I didn't think much of it at first. It was late, past midnight, and I was driving home from a friend's place, just like I always do. The highway was quiet, mostly empty except for a few cars scattered here and there. I remember passing this white van, nothing special about it. It was moving slowly in the right lane, and I sped past it like I always do when someone is going under the speed limit. It felt like any other night. But then, a few miles down the road, I glanced in my rearview mirror, and the van was still there. Same distance, same speed. I shrugged it off. I mean, what are the chances? It's just another driver. The road was mostly straight, so it wasn't like there were a lot of exits for them to take. It wasn't unusual, right? Still, I couldn't shake this weird feeling. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking. Maybe I was tired. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I even chuckled a little, feeling stupid for getting paranoid over a van. But then I changed lanes. The van changed lanes too. I sped up slightly. The van kept up. My heart started to beat a little faster, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. I slowed down a bit, hoping they'd just pass me. But no, they stayed right behind me, like a shadow. That's when I started to really feel it. That cold, creeping fear in my chest. I'm not the kind of person who panics easily, or at least I like to think I'm not. But this felt different. I sped up more, testing them, The van kept pace. No matter what I did, speed up, slow down, change lanes, they mirrored my every move. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Something wasn't right. I needed to know for sure. Maybe I was imagining things, letting my mind run wild. So, I decided to take the next exit, one that led to a small empty street, barely lit. No one ever takes it this late, and I figured the van would stay on the highway if they weren't really following me. I signaled, took the exit, and hoped for the best. But the van took the exit too. My stomach twisted into a knot. What the hell was going on? Why would anyone follow me? I wasn't important, just some random guy trying to get home. I tried to think of a reason, any reason why this van would be behind me, but nothing made sense. I kept driving, turning onto random streets, making loops, anything to lose them. But they didn't give up. Every turn I made, they made. Every time I tried to speed away, they stayed right on my tail. My heart was racing now, my palms sweaty. I glanced at my phone. No signal, of course. Out here in the middle of nowhere, the service always drops. I was alone, completely alone. That's when I decided I couldn't run anymore. I had to confront them. I needed to know who was behind the wheel, why they were following me. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding, and I was overreacting. But my gut told me something else, something darker. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking as I put the car in park. The van pulled up behind me and stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable. I sat there for a few seconds, my breath catching in my throat. What was I even going to say? Why are you following me? It sounded ridiculous in my head, but there was no other option. I stepped out of the car, the cool night air hitting my face. I walked slowly toward the van, my legs feeling heavier with each step. The windows were dark, too dark to see inside. No movement, no sound. It was like the van was just waiting. I got closer, my heart thudding in my chest. I was about to knock on the window, maybe call out to whoever was inside, when the driver's door suddenly swung open. Before I could react, someone charged out of the van, slamming into me. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. I tried to scream, but the shock froze my voice. I didn't even get a good look at them, just a blur of movement and the feeling of rough hands grabbing me, dragging me towards the van. My mind was spinning. How had this gone so wrong? 1 minute, I was driving home, and now, this. I struggled, tried to fight back, but it was useless. They were too strong. I kicked out, but they didn't stop. I screamed, but no one was around to hear me. The road was empty. The world was silent. I was being pulled toward the van, closer to that dark, open door. My feet scraped against the ground, but it didn't slow them down. I could feel the cold metal of the van as they pushed me inside, and for a brief moment, I thought about all the things I should have done differently. I should have kept driving. I should have stayed in my car. I should have... And then, everything went dark. I don't know what happened after that. I don't even know if I'm alive to tell you this. Maybe someone will find my car abandoned on the side of the road. Maybe they'll search, but they won't find me. Maybe the van will disappear, just like I did. All I know is that the last thing I heard was the sound of that van door closing behind me, sealing me away from the world. And now, I'm gone. I don't know if I imagined it at first. It was late, probably past midnight, and I was driving home from work. My shift had run longer than usual, and all I could think about was getting into bed. The road was almost empty, the street lights spaced far apart, casting strange shadows over everything. It made the car feel isolated, like I was the only person left in the world. But something felt off. At first, I thought it was just the exhaustion, my mind playing tricks on me as it often does when I'm this tired. It's happened before. seeing movement from the corner of my eye, only to realize it's nothing. So when I heard the sound of faint rustling, I told myself it was just the wind or something rolling around in the back of the car. I hadn't cleaned it out in weeks, after all. The road stretched on, dark and silent. The sound came again, a little louder this time. A soft, almost rhythmic noise, like breathing. It felt closer. I told myself to focus. I needed to pay attention to the road, not the strange sounds. But my heartbeat had quickened, a strange anxiety creeping in, and my palms were starting to sweat. That feeling, you know, like when you're sure someone is watching you. Without thinking, I glanced at the rearview mirror. For a split second, I froze. There, just out of the corner of the mirror, I could make out the shape of a person. It was too dark to see clearly, but I was sure of it. Someone was sitting in the back seat. My chest tightened, and I forced myself to look straight ahead. Don't panic, I thought. Don't let him know you've seen him. My breathing became shallow, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I didn't dare look again. How did he get there? I hadn't stopped anywhere except the gas station when I first left work. Did he get in then? How long had he been hiding back there? My mind raced with questions, but none of them mattered now. What mattered was what I was going to do next. I tried to stay calm, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Should I stop? Keep driving? What if he had a weapon? What if stopping gave him the chance to do something? I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, like he was waiting for the right moment to act. My stomach churned, and it felt like the walls of the car were closing in. I had to get out of this, but I couldn't let him know that I knew. I drove on, eyes locked on the road. Every second felt like an hour. My mind raced through options, none of them good. There were no other cars around, and the nearest town was still miles away. If I stopped now, I'd be alone with him. But if I kept driving, how much longer could I last before he decided to make his move? Then I saw it. A gas station up ahead, just off the highway. It was dimly lit, but there were a few cars parked outside, and I could see the outline of a cashier inside. My chance. I couldn't risk making it obvious, so I slowed down as if I was just pulling in casually. But my hands were shaking, and my whole body was tense. I could feel him back there, watching. I pulled up near the front of the station, under the lights. For a moment, I sat there, the engine still running. This was it. I had to move now, before he did. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed the door handle, threw it open, and stumbled out of the car. I didn't scream at first. I think I was too scared to even make a sound. But then I saw the cashier through the glass, and the terror spilled out of me. I shouted for help, pointing at my car, telling them someone was inside. My voice was shaky, but I didn't care. The fear was too real. A couple of people nearby turned to look, and one of them, a man, rushed over. Together, we cautiously approached the car, him in front, me trailing behind, my body trembling. The cashier came out too, holding his phone, ready to call the police. But when we opened the back door, the back seat was empty. I stood there, staring in disbelief. There was no one there, no sign of anyone ever being there. My mind reeled. I knew what I had seen. There had been someone in the back seat, I was sure of it. The breathing, the outline in the mirror, it was all real. But now, there was nothing. Just my messy car and the sound of the gas station lights buzzing overhead. The police came not long after, but there was nothing they could do. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, no clues. They didn't say it, but I could tell they didn't believe me. They thought I was tired, stressed, imagining things. Maybe I was. But I know what I saw. I haven't driven at night since then. I still think about it every time I get into my car, checking the back seat, even though I know it's empty. But I can't shake the feeling that someone was there. And maybe, just maybe, they'll come back. That night still haunts me. I don't usually drive at night, especially not on roads like this, long, straight, and empty, with nothing but the occasional tree or road sign. But tonight, I had no choice. I had to get home, and it was already past midnight. The weather didn't help either. The fog came out of nowhere, thick and heavy like a blanket thrown over the road. My headlights barely cut through it, lighting up just a few feet in front of me. I hated it. Driving in fog always made me nervous. You never know what could be hiding in it. But I needed to keep going. Home wasn't that far. For a while, it was just me and the fog. The world outside seemed dead. No animals, no other cars, just silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, and I kept checking the clock, hoping the time would move faster. It didn't. Then, I noticed something. Headlights, faint in my rearview mirror. At first I felt relieved. Another car meant I wasn't alone out here. But something was strange. The car behind me wasn't speeding up to pass. It just stayed there, far enough away that I couldn't see it clearly, but close enough to notice. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the driver was also being cautious in this fog. Maybe they didn't want to pass in these conditions. Still, my heart started beating a little faster. I slowed down slightly, hoping the car would pass. It didn't. It stayed behind me, matching my speed. My pulse quickened. This wasn't normal. I sped up, trying to put some distance between us, but the headlights stayed right behind me, never getting closer, but never fading away either. My foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, and my tires squealed as the car shot forward. The fog made it hard to see, and I could feel my stomach twist with fear. I checked the rearview mirror again, and the car was still there, keeping up without any trouble. The headlights flickered for a moment, and I thought maybe they would back off. But then they started flashing, on and off, over and over again. Panic gripped me. I didn't know what to do. The road was straight, no side streets or exits in sight. The car was too close. If I slammed on the brakes, they would rear end me for sure. My hands were shaking now. Was this some kind of prank? Or were they trying to scare me? I didn't know, but I wasn't about to slow down and find out. I tried to stay calm, but every time the lights flashed, my anxiety spiked. The fog was getting thicker, and I could barely see the lines on the road anymore. My mind raced, thinking about every horror movie I'd ever seen. Was this how it happened? A car following too closely, someone playing a twisted game on a lonely road? I pushed those thoughts away, trying to focus on the road, but they kept creeping back. Suddenly, the lights behind me stopped flashing. I took a deep breath, thinking maybe it was over, but then they sped up, getting closer, almost right on my bumper. I could feel the pressure building. I couldn't think straight. I swerved into the other lane, hoping to shake them off, but they followed. I tried again, zigzagging across the road, but it didn't work. The car stayed with me, like a shadow, unshakable. I started to question my own sanity. Was I imagining this? Maybe the fog was messing with my mind, or maybe it was all real and I was in serious trouble. Either way, I couldn't stop. I had to get away. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the headlights were gone. I blinked, wondering if they had turned off the road or disappeared into the fog. My heart pounded in my chest, but I felt a small wave of relief wash over me. Maybe they were gone for good. I kept driving, the fog still thick as ever, but the fear in my chest was beginning to ease, until I saw the lights again. This time, they were beside me. The car had pulled up alongside mine, moving at the same speed. I couldn't make out the people inside, just shapes, dark and shadowy. My hands were shaking so badly that I thought I might lose control of the wheel. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but my eyes kept darting toward the car. What did they want? Why weren't they passing me or leaving me alone? I glanced over again, and this time I saw them clearly. Two figures, their faces hidden in the shadows, but their eyes locked on me. My heart skipped a beat. I looked away, hoping they would go away, but they didn't. They stayed beside me for what felt like forever, watching me. I couldn't take it anymore. I hit the brakes hard, hoping the car would zoom ahead and disappear, but they didn't. They slowed down with me, matching my every move. My mind raced. I needed to pull over, but there was nowhere safe. The fog was too thick. I couldn't see anything but the road in front of me. I tried to accelerate again, but my hands were shaking too much. The fog seemed to press in closer, suffocating me. My heart pounded in my ears, and I could barely breathe. I just needed to get out of here, but I didn't know how. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it. A loud crash, metal scraping against metal. My car jerked violently to the side, and I struggled to keep control. My vision blurred, and I thought I heard voices, but I couldn't be sure. And then everything went dark. That's all I remember. I don't know if the car behind me was real or if I imagined it in the fog. All I know is that when I woke up, I was alone. The road was empty. The fog was gone, but sometimes, late at night when I'm driving home, I feel like I can still see those headlights, just barely, in the rearview mirror, and I wonder if they're following me again. It was around 1 a.m. when I found myself driving down a highway that seemed to stretch forever. There was no one around, just the two lanes of cracked asphalt and the darkness pressing in from all sides. The only sound was the hum of my engine and the occasional thump of tires hitting potholes. The road was straight, endless, and dead quiet. I wasn't even supposed to be out this late. My plan was to drive to the next town, check into a cheap motel, and get some rest. The GPS said the nearest place was still about 2 hours away. Fine, I thought. I could push through. The darkness was starting to feel oppressive, though. My headlights only reached so far, and beyond that, it was just black. That's when I noticed it. A car behind me. At first, I didn't think much about it. Plenty of people drove at night, right? But the longer I drove, the more I realized it wasn't going away. I'd been watching it in the rearview mirror for at least 30 minutes now. No matter how fast I went, no matter if I slowed down, it stayed there, always at the same distance. It didn't try to pass me, didn't get closer, just followed. I tried not to think about it too much. There were probably just a few other late-night drivers like me. But then another car appeared ahead of me. Its red taillights glowed in the distance, and it seemed like it was matching my speed too. That's weird, I thought. Now there were two, one in front, one behind. I sped up just to see what would happen. The car ahead of me sped up too. The one behind kept pace, still at that same distance. I was boxed in, I realized. Trapped between these two cars with nowhere to go, panic started creeping in, but I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was just some weird coincidence, a group of travelers going the same way. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. It didn't make sense. Why weren't they passing me? Why stay so close? Then another car appeared. This one came up on my left, slowly pulling alongside me. I glanced over, hoping to catch the driver's eye, maybe give a friendly wave. But when I did, they were staring at me. Not glancing, not just a quick look. No, they were staring, straight into my car, through my window, and directly at me. It was a woman, her face blank, eyes unblinking. She wasn't looking at the road at all, just me. My heart started racing. I couldn't think straight anymore. The other cars were still there, one in front, one behind, and now this woman on my left. I floored the gas pedal, desperate to get away, but it didn't matter. They all kept up. No one moved. They were just there, keeping me boxed in like they were playing some kind of sick game. I couldn't understand what was happening. Was I imagining this? Was I just tired? I checked the clock. 1:45 a.m. Still too far from the next town. My hands were shaking now, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I needed to think. I needed to get away from these people. Up ahead, I spotted a gas station. Its fluorescent lights flickered in the distance, a beacon in the dark. Relief flooded through me. I'd stop there, get out of the car, and maybe everything would make sense again. Maybe these people would just drive on and leave me alone. I pulled into the gas station, tires screeching on the pavement as I parked next to the pumps. But as soon as I stepped out of the car, I realized my mistake. The cars that had been following me, they pulled in too. I watched in horror as the car behind me rolled to a stop on the opposite side of the lot. The one that had been ahead parked right by the entrance. And the one with the staring woman? She just sat there, still staring through her window, her face bathed in the harsh light of the gas station. My heart pounded in my chest. I glanced at the gas station building. There was no one inside, no attendant, no other cars, just silence. I didn't know what to do. My feet felt like they were stuck in place. Then, the doors of the cars started to open, one by one. Figures stepped out, moving slowly, deliberately, like they had all the time in the world. I couldn't see their faces clearly under the dim lights, but I could feel their eyes on me watching. Without thinking, I ran. I left my car at the pumps, sprinting across the parking lot and into the dark field beside the highway. The tall grass whipped at my legs as I ran, not daring to look back. My breath came in sharp, painful gasps. All I could hear was the pounding of my heart and the distant hum of the highway. When I finally stopped, my lungs burning, I risked a glance behind me. The gas station was far off now, but the headlights of those cars, they were still there. Still pointed at me, glowing like cold eyes in the night. I thought I was safe in the field, hidden by the darkness, but then I saw movement. One of the figures had stepped out of their car and was walking toward the field, slowly, calmly. It didn't make sense. Why were they doing this? Why me? I stood frozen, unable to think, unable to move. My mind raced with questions, but no answers came. I wasn't sure if I'd ever escape. Maybe they'd been following me for longer than I knew. Maybe they'd been watching me from the moment I left home. All I knew was that they weren't done. I turned and ran again, deeper into the field, the highway disappearing behind me. But no matter how far I went, I could still feel them, watching, waiting. And I'm not sure if they'll ever stop. I never really believed the stories, not until tonight. People disappearing on this old highway? It felt like some urban legend, one of those things people tell to scare you when you're driving alone at night. But there was always a part of me that wondered, why did people keep talking about it? It was late. I was driving back from a friend's place, and I'd taken this stretch of road hundreds of times. Even though I've heard about the disappearances, it's always been easier to just laugh it off. The sky was pitch black, and there were no cars in sight. Just me, my headlights, and the endless road ahead. I should have felt relieved to have the highway to myself, but something was different tonight. There was this tight feeling in my chest, like something bad was about to happen. The air felt heavier, colder even. Maybe I was just tired. About halfway through my drive, I noticed a car behind me. I didn't think much of it at first. It was an old, beat-up car, one of those boxy, rust-covered ones that you don't see much anymore. It kept its distance, not getting too close, but not falling back either. It wasn't strange for a car to be out here this late, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But I couldn't help glancing in my rearview mirror every few seconds. The car was still there, always at the same distance. It wasn't trying to pass me, but it wasn't going away either. I pressed my foot down on the gas a little harder. Maybe I could put some space between us, just enough to ease the growing tension in my gut. But no matter how fast I went, the car stayed the same distance behind me. It didn't speed up or slow down, just followed. That's when I started to really panic. I couldn't tell who was driving. The headlights were too bright, blinding me whenever I looked back. My hands started shaking on the wheel. I had to do something. Maybe I could lose them. I hit the gas harder, the engine roaring as I pushed my car faster down the empty road. For a moment, I thought I was in the clear, but then the car sped up too. It was right on my tail now, so close that if I stopped suddenly, it would crash right into me. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my mouth went dry. This wasn't normal. Nobody drives like this unless they're trying to mess with you. Or worse. I swerved, trying to shake them, but they stayed right behind me, mirroring my every move. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the car pulled ahead and blocked the road in front of me. I slammed on my brakes, tires screeching as I came to a halt. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. The road was too narrow to turn around quickly, and my fuel was running low. I knew I wouldn't make it far if I tried to reverse. The driver's door of the other car opened slowly, and someone stepped out. The figure moved with this unsettling calm, like they knew I had nowhere to go. I couldn't see much in the darkness, just the outline of a person walking toward me. They were holding something, and as they got closer, I realized it was metallic. It caught the light of my headlights, and I froze. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just some random person trying to scare me. This was real. All those disappearances. They weren't accidents. This person, whoever they were, had done this before. And now, I was next. My mind raced, trying to think of what to do. Should I stay in the car and lock the doors, or should I run? My hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't even grip the steering wheel. I glanced at the dashboard. Empty. The fuel light was on. I couldn't outrun them even if I wanted to. The figure was getting closer, and I could see them clearly now. They were calm, almost too calm, like they knew how this would end. They reached the driver's side door, and I heard the tap of metal against the window. I had to act now. I fumbled with the keys, trying to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. Panic shot through me, and I tried again, my heart pounding louder in my ears than the engine that refused to start. I could feel the weight of their presence right outside the door, like they were just waiting for me to make the wrong move. My breath caught in my throat as the handle of the door began to move, slow and deliberate. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. It was as if they'd done this 100 times before, each disappearance another victim on this forgotten road. I screamed in my head, desperate for the car to start. Just one more turn of the key, just one more chance. But the handle clicked, and the door began to creak open. I don't know what happened next, or if I ever got out of there. Maybe I didn't. Maybe this post is just me trying to make sense of it all. Maybe I never even drove down that road. But if you're ever out there and you see an old car following you late at night, don't stop. Just keep driving, and never look back. I always hated driving at night, but sometimes you don't have a choice. The road was almost empty, except for the shadows of trees bending over like they wanted to grab my car. My eyes were heavy and the music was low, more like background noise than something I was really listening to. The highway stretched ahead of me, dark and quiet, and I thought about how soon I'd be home. I didn't see the car coming. It swerved out of nowhere, headlights too bright, and suddenly it was right beside me. I barely had time to react before it cut in front of me, forcing me off the road. My hands jerked the steering wheel, tires screeching. There was nothing I could do. I slammed into something hard, maybe a tree, I don't know. The impact was violent. My head hit the window, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my car anymore. I was in the back seat of another car. The smell of old leather hit me first, then the pain in my head. My wrists were tied together with something rough, cutting into my skin. Panic rose in my chest, but before I could even think of screaming, I heard a voice. "Don't make a sound." It was calm, too calm. I froze, my heart pounding. I turned my head slowly. The driver was a man, but I couldn't see much of him. He didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I wanted to speak, to ask where we were going, what he wanted from me, but I couldn't find the words. We were just driving. For a long time, I was silent, watching the road. We passed nothing but empty fields and trees. No signs, no other cars, just miles of darkness. My head throbbed, and my thoughts kept slipping away. Every time I tried to focus, I felt myself drifting, like my mind was breaking apart. I don't know how long we drove. Minutes? Hours? Time felt strange, like it didn't matter anymore. Every now and then, the car would slow down, then speed up again, but it never stopped. I tried to talk, but my voice came out shaky. "Where are we going?" I whispered, almost hoping he wouldn't hear me. He didn't answer. I watched him in the rearview mirror. His eyes were cold, empty, like this was just another night for him. He didn't seem angry or rushed, just focused, like he enjoyed this, the driving, the control. I tried to think of reasons why this was happening. Did I cut him off earlier? Did I do something wrong? But none of it made sense. Suddenly the car slowed down and pulled into a gas station. My heart jumped. This was it. This was my chance. I could run. I could scream. I could... "Don't try anything," he said before I could even move. His voice was flat, like he'd already thought of everything. He got out, walking around the car to fill up the tank. I watched him, trying to figure out what to do. The station was empty. There were no people, no other cars, just us. I glanced at the door handle, my fingers itching to reach for it, but the knot in my stomach told me it wouldn't end well. He got back in, still calm, and we drove off again into the night. I realized then that there was no destination. He wasn't taking me anywhere. There was no plan, no place we were going. He just wanted to drive. It felt like he could do this forever, just keep me trapped in this car, on this endless road, until I disappeared into the night. The more I thought about it, the more I understood. This wasn't about where we were going. It was about the drive itself, the control. He was the one in charge, and I had no way out. The highway stretched on, and my hope faded with every mile. And then, out of nowhere, the car stopped. It was the middle of nowhere. No lights, no buildings, no signs, just an empty road surrounded by fields. I didn't understand. My breath caught in my throat, waiting for whatever was going to happen next, but he didn't say anything. He just turned off the engine, got out of the car, and walked away. I waited for him to come back. 5 minutes, 10, maybe more, but he never did. I tried to move, my wrists still tied, but I couldn't do much. I struggled with the ropes, my breath coming in shallow gasps. What was this? Some kind of game? Would he come back, or had he left me here to die? The road was quiet, and the silence pressed down on me heavier than before. After a while, I managed to free my hands. I opened the door, stepping out onto the cold asphalt. I looked around, but there was nothing. Just the wind in the trees and the sound of my own breathing. The man was gone, like he had never been there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me. Somewhere, out there in the dark, waiting. I don't know how long I stood there, alone on the side of the road. Eventually, I started walking, not sure where I was going or how I'd get help. All I knew was that I had survived, but something told me this wasn't over. I keep looking over my shoulder, wondering if I'll ever see him again. Or maybe he's already seen me, just waiting for the right moment to finish what he started. I still can't drive at night. I can't stop thinking about the long, dark roads and the man who could be out there, somewhere, waiting for another midnight drive. I don't know if I'll make it. I don't know if this will be the last thing I ever tell anyone, but I need to say it before they find me. I didn't have a choice. The car was just sitting there, keys still in the ignition. I was bruised, my face swollen, arms aching from trying to break free for days. I saw my chance, and I took it. There's only so long you can be held before something inside you snaps, you know? That moment came for me when I heard them talking outside the door, making plans to move me somewhere I'd never be found. I couldn't let that happen, so I ran. I drove as fast as I could, my hands shaking on the wheel. The road ahead stretched on forever, just dark asphalt disappearing into the night. No streetlights, no houses, just blackness. My mind was racing, trying to calculate how much time I had. Minutes? Hours? I couldn't be sure. Maybe they hadn't noticed yet. Maybe they were too confident I wouldn't escape. Or maybe they were already on my tail. Every mile felt like a gamble. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd pass out. I kept looking at the rearview mirror, my eyes burning from the lack of sleep. Was that a car in the distance? I couldn't tell. It felt like something was always following me, but my head wasn't right. Not after what they did. The gas tank was running low. I had to stop. I pulled into a small gas station, the only light I'd seen in what felt like hours. The place was nearly empty. Just one car parked outside, an old beat-up truck. The man inside looked normal enough at first, but then he kept looking at me, too long, too close, like he could see right through me. His questions came slowly, too slow for my liking. "Where are you heading, miss?" I didn't answer right away. I couldn't trust anyone. I had to keep moving, but his eyes were sharp, like he was trying to figure me out, trying to know more than I wanted to give. I thought about asking him for help, for just a second, but no. He could be one of them, or worse, someone who didn't care, someone who could make things worse. So I paid, avoided his stare, and got back in the car. When I looked at the mirror again, my heart froze. The same car, far in the distance, was still there. The one I thought was following me earlier, but now I was sure. They found me. I could feel it in my gut. I pressed the gas pedal and the car jumped forward. They wouldn't take me again. I had come too far. But as I sped up, so did they. I could see their headlights getting closer, cutting through the night like knives. My chest tightened. They were gaining on me, and I didn't know this road. I didn't know where to turn. It was just me, the dark highway, and them. I made a sharp turn, hoping to lose them, but it only slowed me down. My hands were slippery with sweat, and I almost lost control of the wheel. Panic was crawling up my throat. The road wasn't just straight now. There were more turns, more places to mess up. My mind was running in circles, trying to think of something, anything, to get me out of this. But nothing was making sense. I couldn't think clearly. The lights behind me kept getting brighter, like they were shining directly into my skull. I tried to go faster, but I wasn't used to this car. I almost hit a deer, swerving at the last second, my tires screeching on the road. My vision was getting blurry. My head ached. Maybe I hadn't slept at all in the last few days. Or maybe it was just the fear, crawling inside me, making me see things that weren't there. But they were real. The car was real, and it was too close now. I pushed the car as fast as it could go, but the road was getting worse, winding and narrow. I almost didn't see it. A sharp turn that came out of nowhere. I didn't have time to react. The car flew off the road and into a ditch, hitting something hard. My head slammed into the steering wheel. For a second, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, the car was tilted sideways, the engine dead. My body hurt all over, but I was alive. For now. I tried to move, but every muscle screamed in pain. I looked out the window. The headlights were still there, coming closer, slowly this time. They knew I had nowhere to go. I fumbled with the door, my fingers not working right, panic spreading through me like fire. I had to get out. I couldn't stay in the car. I stumbled into the cold night, grabbing the first thing I saw, a piece of metal from the wreck. I could hear them now, the sound of their footsteps in the distance, getting closer. My heart pounded in my ears. I had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. But I wasn't going back. I couldn't. The footsteps grew louder and I could hear them talking, their voices low, like they knew I was trapped. I pressed my back against the car, the sharp metal clutched in my hand. My breath was coming out in short gasps, but I tried to keep quiet. Then, the voices stopped. The footsteps too. Everything went still. I tightened my grip on the metal, ready to strike if they got any closer, but the darkness swallowed me. All I could do was wait, my body trembling with fear and exhaustion. I'm not sure how much time passed, but when the light flickered in the distance, my body froze. They were coming for me. This is it.